session planned here today. We have Dr. Soumya Kanti Ghosh, Group Chief Economic Advisor, State Bank of India, who has made time to speak to us about the Indian budget 2021-2022, bold, confident new direction. And Dr. Soumya Kanti Ghosh will take us through this. Also, we have the honor and the privilege of having Ms. Apurva Srivastava, the Consul General of Canada in Toronto. We also have the honor of having Mr. Venkat Nageshwar, Deputy Managing Director, International Banking Group, State Bank of India, in our midst. We also have Chetan Sehgal, Partner Advisory Services and Country Coordinating Partner, India at BDO Canada. And all of us together all of them together are going to make sure that you have a fantastic session today. So we will have the Q&A by Chetan Sehgal. Also, all of you that are attending today, either on the Zoom meeting or on Facebook Live, please send in your questions. We will have a Q&A with the audience, which I will be moderating. So send in your questions and we will take your questions with Dr. Soumya Kanti Ghosh. So again, that's me here. I'm the president of the Indo-Canada Chamber of Commerce, and it is my honor and privilege to get this meeting started. So what are we going to be talking about today? Those of you who've been following the Indian budget, it consolidates the Prime Minister's Atmanirbhar Bharat initiative. It also focuses on 6 pillars to energize the economy: health and well-being, physical and financial capital infrastructure, inclusive development for aspirational India, reinvigorating human capital, innovation and R&D, minimum government and maximum governance. So the ICCC, in collaboration with SBI Canada Bank and with the support of the Consul General of India in Toronto, bring you this event. And we'd like to thank all of our sponsors and partners, as SBI Canada Bank, Ritu Kumar, Anand Vashisht, and Joseph Xavier. Thank you very much for helping us do this. So with that out of the way, we'd like to get to a little disclaimer. This is just to protect our legal rights here. The webinar, all the information provided is for general information purposes, does not constitute legal or professional advice. And if you can read through that, and at the bottom, the views expressed by the speakers are their own personal opinion, do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the ICCC. With that out of the way as well, I'd like to make way for Apurva Srivastava ji. Apurva ji, we all know Apurva ji is a well-loved person in Toronto. All of us in the Indo-Canadian community know her very well, and it is really a privilege for us to have her at this session. So Apurva ji, if we can have a few words from you about the Indian budget, about overall how we as Indo-Canadians can also look at this, and what is the perspective we should be looking at. So over to you, Apurva ji.
Thank you, Vijay. Thank you, State Bank of India, Indo-Canada Chamber of Commerce, for organizing this special discussion on this year's budget. I would also like to welcome the expert panel here, who will give us a detailed overview of the budget. So I'll focus on the opportunities that this budget creates as we recover from pandemic and pursue the path of rebuilding and revival. So in many ways, if you see, the groundwork for this year's budget was laid even before the pandemic was raging in full force. While India enforced one of the strictest lockdown to save human lives, we are also provided extensive social support to vulnerable sections of society and ensured rapid transmission of health infrastructure as well. As you already know that, before the onslaught of pandemic, we were not, we were importing all our, PPEs and masks, and within 3 to 4 months, we kind of created our capability, and now we are the second largest manufacturer of PPE. So this kind of transformation took place during the pandemic. So the economic package was $270 million US, which is around 10% of our GDP. And it was targeted and reform oriented, which helped in converting this crisis into opportunity. So this year's budget is basically the continuation of this process. It is a pragmatic and forward-looking budget, which will accelerate growth across sectors. It reiterates the arrival of New India, where government has made a move towards an investment-led growth model over the traditional consumption-led growth model. So as you have already spoken about the 6 pillars, the health and wellness will have enormous socio-economic consequence as we recover from pandemic. The capital and infrastructure are so important for revival and growth. Inclusive development reflects the importance being given by the government to the vulnerable sections like migrant workers and those working in agriculture and fisheries. Reinvigoration of human capital recognizes its importance in expanding manufacturing and knowledge economy. The innovation and R&D, which is a logical requirement to promote talent and create value. As you already know, the R&D sector in India is like we are the third largest startup system. During the pandemic time, we had 1,600 new startups, 16 of which were they crossed $1 billion. It's all the 6th pillar is the minimum government and the maximum governments, which will enhance by effectively utilizing our digital potential. As you know, we are 1.2 billion. We have 1.2 billion Aadhaars. We have 1.2 billion bank accounts and 1.2 billion phone connections, and all these are linked to give services to the people directly. The Honorable Finance Minister has also offered some glimpses of budget's repercussion for the world. It is clear that investing in India will become easier and it will cover a wider canvas. The production link incentive will encourage global supply chains to incorporate our capabilities. Increased allocation for social investment will lead to expansion of reservoir of skill and human capital. Our strong research and innovation will make itself similarly felt up in the global value chain. So there's a lot of question about Atmanirbhar Bharat. So Atmanirbhar Bharat is about creating stronger capabilities. It's not looking inwards, but it's about creating stronger capabilities at home to make a more effective contribution globally. As you know, India has got recognition as pharmacy of the world. It's the way we have been developing our own vaccines and giving it to the world. We are getting a lot of recognition for that. The world is today looking much more from India. It requires additional engines to grow to de-risk the global economy. The world is also searching for trusted partners and resilient supply chains. And India has to, if India has to step up to those challenges, it must create capabilities at home, which can only happen when we make the investment necessary to build a domestic strength, modernize our infrastructure, and upgrade our skills. So all of that is facilitated by larger enabling environment that provides basic necessities to all while promoting education, skill, employment, and innovation. I'm very happy to note that this year's budget addresses all these issues, and by doing so, it ensures that the world can count more on India. The budget makes ample allocations to cushion us from the shocks of the past year, readies as a country to be part of the investment-led growth in the present and pave the path for a greener and sustainable economy in the future. In ways more than one, the budget 2021-22 will be an integral and one of the most important chapters of India's future growth history. So I look for, this is just a general overview which I wanted to give, and I just look forward to hearing all the interactions. Thank you so much again for inviting me, and best of luck for the deliberations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Apurva ji. I think that's a very good, direction, and I think you've set the stage for us to go and deep dive into this deeper. With that, I'd like to call upon Mr. C. Venkat Nageshwar, Deputy Managing Director, International Banking Group, State Bank of India. Mr. Venkat, if you can, take this over from here, give us your perspective. And before we get into a deeper dive with Dr. Ghosh.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Her Excellency, Ms. Apurva Srivastava, Consul General of India in Toronto. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning to all of you. It's wonderful to have you all in this important virtual seminar to decipher and dissect the Union Budget 2021-22. I thank ICC for making me a part of this seminar. One of the most distressing years by far, 2020, marked the year of a deadly pandemic that drastically impacted the health, businesses, and communities across the globe. The world has stepped into 2021 with the hope for the future. There was immense speculation as to what letter of an alphabet the shape of the post-COVID economy be. A wide range have been predicted: U, W, V, and even K. With the vaccination now starting and segments of economies showing resilience, there are good prospects of an economic recovery for 2021. The Indian economy has also got battered, as Her Excellency had mentioned, due to the subsequent lockdown, which exposed gaps in supply chain and delays in working around the social distancing norms. Critical indicators such as degrowth in Indian economy, contraction in GDP, widening of fiscal deficit, and high inflation have highlighted a severe strike on the economy in the past year. But as it is said, there is a hope after despair and many sense after darkness. Similarly, the Indian economy has started showing signs of recovery. Faced with the daunting twin task of pulling back the economy from the clutches of degrowth, a slew of fiscal and non-fiscal measures are taken during the year to rebound the economy from the aftermath of the pandemic. The most important being the Union Budget 2021-22 presented by Honorable Finance Minister, which is based on the 6 pillars which ma'am had mentioned and which Mr. Thomas has also very clearly illustrated. This is a very bold budget. Why we call it as a very bold budget? Because this is a budget for growth. We are looking at a capital expenditure of 5.5 lakh crores, which again, we will be looking for most of the capital investments to come from various parts of the globe and more particularly from Canada. The budget for transparency, because it includes an extra budgetary borrowing. For the first time, we have seen extra budget borrowing being a part of the fiscal deficit, and removing the overt reliance on FCI on NSSF. This is a budget for health focusing on 3 areas: the preventive, curative, and well-being. And this is a budget for stability with cleaning up the balance sheets of the banks, as we talk about it. Dr. Soumya Kant Ghosh will be talking about it, by creating an ARC, AMC, AF structure, and a huge disinvestment program coming up. All these three will throw out many opportunities for the investors to channelize their investments that will give them the best returns. The markets have given a thumbs up to this particular budget. Added to this, better than the expected corporate earnings from some of the biggest industry players led to the buying in the banking and FMCG stocks, pushing the benchmarks indices higher. State Bank of India had delivered fabulous results. You would have seen it. And yesterday, incidentally, there was a circuit breaker also when the markets opened in the morning for SBI share. One of the important things that we have shown in our annual results was that the retail credit growth has come back to the pre-COVID levels. We have a very, very solid liability franchise. Our asset liability has come back to the normalcy. In fact, our slippage ratios have come down to 1.27%, and collection efficiency has improved to 96.5%. We have provided, our PCR is 90.21, which even the finance minister was talking about how the PCR of all the public sector banks with such a high levels would help in creation of the bad bank or AMC-AF structure, which I was talking about. Incidentally, yesterday again, Reserve Bank of India has come out with a monetary policy that kept the policy rates not just steady, but they also said that they're going to continue with the accommodative stance. So this is a time where the fiscal and monetary policies are going in tandem to see to it that the economy comes back to normalcy. And therefore, with all these things in the back of the mind, I have no doubt, when I started off my discussion, I said the economy can move in U or W or V or K shape. But now, with all these things, both the fiscal, monetary measures which are being taken, I have absolutely no doubt that we're going to have a V-shaped recovery of our economy, and we'll propel this economy to a greater heights after the tumultuous year which we had in 2020. With these few words, I leave the floor to Dr. Ghosh to simplify and present the budget before this August audience. Stay safe, stay healthy, and namaskar.
Thank you very much, Mr. C. Venkat Nageshwar. That is fantastic. And I think I picked up on one thing there when you said a lot of that money will come from Canada. Now, that is to the audience, that is not Mr. C. Venkat Nageshwar just trying to be nice to the audience here and saying that Canada is good, but Canada on the ground today is the largest FDI investor in India. So Canadian pension funds, all of we are the largest investor in India. So I think Mr. Venkat Nageshwar, that is, I think, a great segue into how in Canada is very intrinsically involved in India, and we are hitting way beyond our size in terms of investment in India. So I think that is something, kudos to Canada as a country in terms of our investment in the Indian infrastructure. So if those of you did not know that, you know something new now, and I think that is something that is Indians, Canadians, and Indo-Canadians should be very proud of. Yeah. So with that, let's move to the meat of today's budget, the main course, which is Insights into Indian Budget 2021-2022 by Dr. Soumya Kanti Ghosh, Group Chief Economic Advisor, State Bank of India. So Dr. Ghosh, without further ado, I'd like to pass this on to you, and we'd like to hear from you. I think everyone's waiting with bated breath to hear from you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be over here, and Her Excellency Consul General of Canada, Madam Apurva Srivastava. Also, thank you to the Indo-Canada Chamber of Commerce and our colleagues, DMD sir, and everybody else in Canada. I think it's it's early morning in Canada, and it's not late night in India. We are approaching 8 o'clock. But I think in the next couple of minutes, I think maybe in the next half an hour or so, I will take you through some of the noted references in this budget, which has been announced by the Honorable FM a couple of days back on Monday, to be more precise. And what I will do is that I will share my screen. So just give me 1 minute, and then I will take you through some of the important points of the slide one. Just give me one. Just 1 second, we'll just say this.
As Dr. Ghosh gets his slides together, I'd like to again request the audience, if you have any questions, please send in your questions under the Q&A section on Zoom or on Facebook Live. Please, under the comment section, please send in your questions. We have a fantastic panel here, and I think we'd love to take as many questions as we can. So please send in your questions.
I think the slides, you can see the slides right now.
Yes, Dr. Ghosh.
So we'll start with the presentation. Basically, this is an analysis of Indian budget 2022. But what I will also talk, I will talk a little bit about the Indian economy, the India-Canada relationship, the investment opportunities and everything. So that actually gives you a holistic bird's eye view. I will start with these the results which came out yesterday, the SBI Q3 results. Actually, that was, that actually gives you an direction of which the Indian economy is moving, because SBI is 20% of India's GDP in terms of its balance sheet size. And that actually gives you a very good barometer of what's happening within the Indian economy. I think if you look into these key trends, everything has been looking up: retail credit growth, franchise, asset quality outcomes. We have a 90% portfolio, the provision coverage ratio right now. So everything is provided for. digital customer onboarding. And so basically the banks and the financial system in particular is actually now very much well capitalized. You can you can see some of the key financial ratios: the yield on advances, cost of deposits, the margins, yield on investment. So basically, I mean, all of them has been steady. But the important point is that the credit deposit ratio is still at a low level. So that means that the banks actually can grow its credit because there is sufficient liquidity is available in the banking system. So as demand is slowly coming back into the system, that could fuel a credit growth. Now, let me start with the global and Indian economy. I think global economy, if you talk about the global economy right now, if you talk about the global economy right now, I think in 2020, it was the sharpest contraction, 3.5 to 4.3%. But the important point is that the global economy is projected to grow by 5.5% in 2021 and 4.2% in 2022. So that is actually the important thing, and the recovery of the global economy and the Indian economy has been at a significantly faster pace than what it was earlier anticipated. There has been a shock to the global trade. Tourist receipt losses has amounted to 1.1 trillion. Global trades in goods and services estimated to have declined by close to 8% in 2020. But the growth in global trade again is supposed to bounce back at 7% in 2021. After that, it tries to get onto the trend growth rate. But the important point is that new technologies are now redefining the comparative advantages in global trade. And that's an advantage which India is also finds itself apart with that advantage. Now, these are some of the important things. India is the 5th largest and one of the fastest growing economies in the world. I think the IMF projects a growth at 11.5%, but our own estimates are at 11%. In fact, the RBI estimates is at 10.5%, but I think that the growth could be actually on the higher side than what is anticipated. Total FY capital FDI flows was more than 70 billion in FY20. Youth population, adolescent, the NIP, the National Infrastructure Investments is supposed to attract investment. And India is actually, as you know, the Honorable Prime Minister has set a goal of 5 trillion by 2025. That's actually just a number, but the ambition is most important. How do we reach there? 2030, 42% of Indian population would be urbanized from 31%. India has ranked 79 positions in World Bank Ease of Doing Business, 4 positions in Global Innovation Index, and for the first time in 17 years, India will run actually a current account surplus. So if you look into actually all the numbers, that looks quite favorable. Now, this is basically the important point which I want to show. If you look into India, the industrial corridors of India actually runs throughout the country. All the industrial corridors, Delhi, Mumbai, Amritsar, Kolkata, and all this. And actually the government of India has given a sufficient attention on building up this road infrastructure. You remember in the 2000, when the Vajpayee was the prime minister, at that point, the golden quadrilateral was launched. And that I think paved the way for years of India's golden growth beginning 2005 till 2008, when because the global economy collapsed because of there was a financial crisis. And India is also very good in the global competitiveness index. India is actually ranked, 68th over there. Now, the important point is that the Indian economy has actually shown a remarkable recovery. There is a lot of reasons behind it. I'll not get into the reasons because then that will take, that could actually take up even half a day. But the important point is that this remarkable increase in recovery was because of a change in behavioral habits of the economic agents, the institutions, and also of the regulators and the government. For example, the nominal loss in first half was around US 180 billion. And now the CSO projects that the gain in the H2 could be at 62 billion. And in fact, we believe this gain could actually go up from the 62 billion. So we could actually end the year with a 7%, the CSO is projecting 7.7%, but our own estimates show that this contraction could be close to 7%. In fact, today only we are revising the estimates of Q3 number and Q4 number. Q3 number, which was trying to do it today, actually our model is now showing that the growth rate could be in the positive territory, and that would be higher than, much higher than what it was earlier anticipated. GST revenue in the last month has been at significantly and was the record levels since it was implemented in July 2017. Most of the high frequency activity indicators are now showing well. We have our own SBI business activity index, which basically looks into February as 100 and sees how the economy has bounced back. And you can see that this number is at 98.2, indicating that only 1.8% of the activity remains to be normalized, and India actually has almost back to the pre-COVID level. The percentage of indicators which showing acceleration has now gone up to 78%. This was as low as 10% or even 10% in April 20, and there has been a phenomenal jump from November. You can see that the curve actually has gone up exponentially when we are looking into the number of indicators which are accelerating. So on all counts, we are having a much faster than anticipated economic recovery. This is basically the inflation. As you know that the India is an inflation targeting regime, but the important point is that the current RBI with the government has been doing a fabulous job in terms of monetary fiscal policy coordination. If you ask me, if you just let me want to digress, I think in 2003, if I remember, the US Fed chairman Ben Bernanke had given a famous speech whereby he talked about constrained discretion in monetary policy making, basically meaning that policy should be more as one discretionary nature rather than a rule-based nature. And this is exactly what the central bank has been doing in conjunction with the RBI. I will give you a very good example of this conjunction when I come towards the end of the presentation, which is basically the game of chickens. But the important point is that inflation has now started to decline. And I know you will have a lot of questions regarding the inflation because we are doing an expansionary fiscal policy. But let me tell you that since the fiscal policy is loaded more towards capital expenditure, which has long gestation lags, inflation is unlikely to be a threat in the coming days. And that is going to be, and that actually I think has been the trend in the last 5-6 years, last 7 years, in fact, after 2014, when inflation has been largely remained under control. The IIP growth has actually now turned into positive territory. The UA bills, which is an indicator of the GST collections, is now in the positive territory. You can look into the decline, what has happened in April 2020. We had a more than 150% decline. Now this number is actually in positive territory. So this has been a remarkable turnaround, and most of the turnaround has actually started from September onwards, and this has continued till date. That's the most important thing, because that actually is giving us hope, and with a reasonable budget and a reasonable monetary policy, I will call it a thoughtful budget and a thoughtful monetary policy, there is every possibility of economic growth getting reinvigorated to higher levels than what we had actually anticipated. This is the composition of India's current account balance. As you can see that the current account balance, the important thing is that India is now going to be in a positive surplus in the current account after 17 years. This is the equity inflows. You can see, all countries have shown a negative equity inflows from FIA into India in 2020. India is the only exception which has actually witnessed close to 25 billion of FIA equity inflows into India in 2020. In external debt, India is comfortable. The debt service ratio has been declining. The external debt to GDP ratio is steady. And the debt service ratio basically is also comfortable. And so basically it all shows that India's external sector numbers are really comfortable and are well within reasonable limits. And that actually is also being reflected in an appreciation of the rupee in the last couple of months. Of course, that has to do with the capital inflows and the deft RBI foreign exchange management, but that is also a reflection of India's strengthening external sector. Now, this is the composition of Indian exports. This is one important graph which I want to show you. Basically, if you look into Indian exports, the inner circle is the April to November 2019. The outer circle is April to November 2020. If you look into it, I think April to November 2020, there is a fundamental difference which has started to happen in terms of Indian exports. You can see, as Ma'am Apurva spoke in the beginning about this, India becoming the pharmacy of the world. You can actually see that the composition of Indian exports of drugs formulation has actually now gone up from 5% to 7%. And the petroleum products and the other important thing is that in the import category, the there has now been a conscious decision to reduce the electronic components from countries like China, and this has been also been reflected by Indian exchange rate policy. So the idea is, as we emphasized in the beginning, the idea of Atmanirbhar Bharat is basically to note that you are looking inwards, but to ensure that Indian industry and all others are getting a robust and competitive platform to grow together with everyone so as to cater to the Indian markets. And interestingly, do you know that I mean, we all talk about this Atmanirbhar Bharat and other things, but do you know in 2008, when the financial crisis happened, I mean, USA, even in the country like USA and in China actually at that point of time has started to strengthen its domestic manufacture, but USA at that point of time has strengthened this shale production. And today you see where does shale production stands. So I think this crisis always gives you an opportunity to develop, to consolidate on your domestic manufacturing base. And India is actually going in that same direction. And it's not that, I mean, there is an element of, so I think we should not confuse with the protectionism that we have. I mean, that there has been a lot of literature on that. Now, the next slide is that the most important side is that there has been a significant increase in household financial savings in first quarter of 2021. I think these numbers are not available after that, but our estimates show that this number could have gone up even further. There are of course reasons for it, but the important point is that there has been an increase in precautionary savings by the people because they could not spend, and also because they were able to not spend much because they were actually, the economy was locked up. But this actually is very important. I am showing you this figure because of the simple reason is that a higher percentage of household financial savings will be required in the Indian context in the current future for financing infrastructural requirements. So that's the important point. And 20% of GDP is not a small number on a GDP of actually 200 lakh crores. So this is basically the important thing, and we have been able to arrest a declining household financial savings. Of course, there are reasons behind it, maybe some of them by default, but it has actually increased significantly in the current fiscal. Now, these are some of the important developments which has happened in the pandemic. For example, we lost around, and just if you want to digress me a little bit, I think one of the crucial reasons why the Indian economy recovered so faster was that, I mean, after the economy was opened up, there was a lot of movement of goods across Indian state boundaries of states. And this good was basically in the form of freight transport, in the form of transport by the airlines and others. So there is actually a segment in the service sector, which is the communication service, telecommunication service, and telecommunication and broadcasting. The important point to know is that people were sitting at home, so therefore they were consuming a huge amount of data. So that explains why the average wireless data usage went up. The telecommunication also, the number of subscribers initially lost 2 crore subscribers. After that, we have gained back those subscribers. So basically what happened is that the economy which was locked down, in the first 3 quarters in terms of a crucial, in terms of the stringent lockdown, was actually able to recover faster when it was opened up because of the remarkable performance of the transportation, communication, and the broadcasting service sector. So that is the most important takeaway of the change in the behavioral habits. I will send you some slides on how India managed the COVID-19 before I get into a discussion of the budget. I think India has done a remarkable performance of the COVID. I think the economic survey, there is an estimate of model that's saying that India is actually, the number of actual cases of India could have been lower by 37 lakhs. In fact, we also did an econometric estimation. I am not getting into the details of that, but this was an econometric estimation based on a 2-stage least square method. But the results you show over here, that a state like Uttar Pradesh, which is of the size of a country like Brazil, actually 20 crore population saved 11 lakhs. Look into Bihar, look into Tamil Nadu. There are examples of larger states like Maharashtra, which has not done that well, but India has lowered its infection by at least 34 lakhs if we purely go by the results from our model. And in fact, this number could also go up on the higher side. So this is a remarkable achievement of India in terms of COVID. And let me tell you one important and interesting anecdote that, I mean, we may have reached an herd immunity the way the COVID cases have collapsed in India. So that is one important thing. And do you know that why I'm talking about this herd immunity? For example, in last year in 2018, this is a figure in public domain. We had an announced 4 crore cases of pneumonia, but out of that, the fatality rate was only 3,078. So it was actually minuscule. So India has always, Indian country and the Indian people has always showed resilience to cope up with the shocks. And this COVID is just a perfect example to showcase our achievement in terms of what we have done to control, in terms of our people and in terms of our resources, what we have done. What we have done in terms of our resources, this is the numbers which is in front of you. India's population, which is other countries of all of you know, the number of cases in countries like US, Mexico, Italy, France, everywhere the number of cases are higher than India in lakhs, and all these countries have a significant higher amount of higher health expenditure. The hospital beds of this country are significantly higher, but still after that, and as you can see that some of the states in India like Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, which doesn't have a proper health infrastructure, has done remarkably well. So therefore, I mean, again, on a lighter note, I am saying is that even though the budget has given a lot of focus on this health expenditure, but even with a low health expenditure and less number of hospital beds, India has managed COVID remarkably. So I think this is the most important point and reason why we have been able to witness a faster recovery, unlike other countries where there have been 2 waves or even sometimes 3 waves. Now, this is the speed of vaccination in India. We actually started from 16th of January, but now our vaccination pace is actually going up exponentially, and we have already crossed the rate at which the world is actually vaccinating itself. And as more vaccines come into the picture, and as you have shown to you, we will become the pharmacy of the world. And this is a tremendous example of, again, the India's own made in India vaccines, which has been actually being used to vaccinate India's people. Now let me, with all this, now let me come into the budget arithmetic. The most important thing in the budget, and as was told by our panelist earlier, is that the budget has projected a significant growth in capital expenditure. In fact, the growth in capital expenditure in real terms is 21%, and the growth in revenue expenditure is supposed to decline by 6.5%. So therefore, when you look at the total expenditure, the growth may not be that significantly high. But if you actually look into capital expenditure and revenue expenditure, the growth in capital expenditure in Indian rupees 1.15 lakh crores, which is 4.7 times higher than the 18-year average of 25,000 growth in capital expenditure. So basically, this is a growth for capital expenditure, and these revenue receipts are also projected more than 10% in real terms. So all these numbers actually shows that this budget is more for projecting capital expenditure rather than on revenue expenditure. The second thing is that what was the genesis of fiscal deficit for FY21? I think there was a revenue loss of 120 billion to the center, but the expenditure actually increased by 56 billion. But do you know why the expenditure increased by 56 billion? 75% of this increase in expenditure was because of the food subsidy. Because in India, we ensured that this entire population, none of the population got hungry. And from the day one, when these packages were announced, we had a package of around 10% of India's GDP. But from the day these packages were announced, it was ensured that all the people should get free rations, and free rations of for the, I think, till at least November. So that actually was one of the reasons why there was so much increase in the food subsidy. So this is another, again, remarkable approach and the human approach to India's COVID management, which is also reflected in the budget numbers. Now, this is some of the budget numbers. What is the numbers which is the holding the key? The primary reasons which the number is holding the key is capital expenditure. The non-tax revenue, as you know, is also supposed to grow up. But the other receipts, which is basically the disinvestment receipts of Air India, then 2 public sector banks are also going to be disinvestment, 1 general insurance company. And a lot of this disinvestment has been carried over from earlier years. So we are very hopeful that India will be able to reach its disinvestment target, which we actually could not do this year because of the pandemic. This is basically corporation tax and income tax next year the growth rate is actually quite reasonable, because they will come over on significantly lower and negative base. Even customs are expected to pick up in FY 2092, and all these numbers are reasonable. See why these numbers are so reasonable. Tax buoyancy is the primary is an indicator to measure the efficiency and responsiveness of revenue mobilization in response to growth in GDP. If you look into India's tax buoyancy, it actually has fluctuated a lot. We were at 2.6 in FY1, then it declined in that pandemic years to 0.2. In FY21 budgetary estimates, we projected 2, but unfortunately we came down to 1.3 because of the pandemic. But in FY22, the tax buoyancy we are projecting 1.2, which is interestingly lower than the pandemic tax buoyancy. So basically this means that the numbers are, fiscal deficit numbers are reasonable, fiscal deficit numbers are pragmatic. And in May, when we will get the fiscal deficit final numbers for this fiscal, I can assure you that there could be a pleasant surprise. We are likely to undershoot the 9.5 fiscal deficit which we had this year. And in fact, I will give you one example over here. India's 9.5% fiscal deficit is happening because we have brought out all the off-balance sheet of the FCI into the budget this year. And if we exclude that off-balance sheet, India's fiscal deficit this year is actually at 8.7%. So be rest assured that with these tax buoyancy projections in FY22, the fiscal deficit for next year 6.8 is likely to be met very comfortably, if not undershot from that level. Now, this is basically the disinvestment targets of the government. I think disinvestment has always been, depends on the market appetite, but it was only in the 2 years that FY18 and FY19, when Honorable Arun Jaitley, late Arun Jaitley was the finance minister, that were able to reach this target. FY18 we surpassed it, FY19 we surpassed it, but we could not do much in FY21. But I think in FY22 there is every possibility that this will happen, because we have an LIC PI IPO. There are also pending disinvestments of FY21. And also the disinvestment process for LIC and other financial institutions is pegged at 14 billion. So we are actually going to do a lot of this disinvestment this year. The most important point is that our subsidy bill has been cleaned up significantly. Food subsidy bill is inflated by US 1.7 billion this year. You can see this number, 16 billion to 58 billion, it has increased, but it was also because of a large part of an off-balance sheet activity. But petroleum subsidy has almost eliminated. The fertilizer subsidy also has gone up this year because there were some arrears which were paid. But our sense is that India has done remarkably well in terms of cleaning up its fiscal deficit, off-balance sheet activities, and bringing on to the mainstream. The government, this is important. The government has actually shifted 22 billion of off-balance sheet to food subsidy. So if you actually remove that food subsidy, off-balance sheet, the fiscal deficit is at 8.7% instead of 9.5% on GDP. And the important point is that there's also a lot of people who are saying that this is off-balance sheet activity, so that actually explains the additional expenditure. I think that is not a correct one. Even if we exclude the off-balance sheet activities shifted to the food subsidy bill, the increase in expenditure is still 35 US billion, which is 1.3% of India's GDP. This is the direct fiscal impulse that the government actually has done in terms of reviving the economy, apart from the several other steps which it has taken. Now, this is another important thing, how the fiscal deficit is going to be financed next year. 26% of the fiscal deficit are going to be, 20% of the fiscal deficit is going to be met from, 60% is from the borrowings, 26% from the small savings. And so basically, but the important point is that here again, the numbers are actually very interesting, because if you look at the red number, that's a short-term borrowing, that is 12.2%, that is at 3.3%. Again, I have a feeling that the government actually could increase the level of short-term borrowings from 3% to maybe to higher levels, depending on the interest rates prevailing in the economy. And that in turn could actually reduce the reliance on the to debtor securities. So this is again a deft management on the part of the government and the RBI, but this will actually is a progressive development which will happen during the course of the time, depending on market developments. Now, in terms of the borrowings, as I said, the total borrowings of the government has actually will remain as the same level this year of the center and states of around US 250 billion. But the important point is that even with these record borrowings of the center and states in FY21, the government has been able to borrow at the lowest rate in the 16 years because the central bank, and as I will show you in one of the next slides, has maintained significant amount of liquidity in the banking system that has brought back financial stability into the market and ensured that government is able to borrow at interest rates. So this has been a classic RBI government tango in terms of reviving the economy. Now, the other important thing is that the extra budgetary resources have been progressively declined. And as I said to you earlier, what used to happen, if you look into this table, the extra budgetary resources of the center and the states were extra budgetary resources of the center compared to fiscal deficit were significantly higher than the fiscal deficit of the center. And this was actually of the non-transparency. This year, both the numbers are almost matching at 6.8% and 6.9%. There's a minor difference. Maybe this is because of the adjustment. But the important point is that India's fiscal deficit number of 9.5%, which is shown in the budget, is actually the extent of true fiscal indebtedness and takes into account everything, including off-balance sheet activities. So from that point of view, I think the market actually is saluting the transparency of the deficit numbers as it has been given out. And the extra budgetary resources of the public sector undertakings is also declining. It had declined from 63.1 billion to 48.3 billion in the last 2 years. So everywhere there is a progression. Now, I'll go through these slides very quickly. I think there is a lot of discussion which has happened in the economic survey that India's policy, fiscal policy should be counter-cyclical. Yes, there is some element of truth in it, because if you look into the history of India's fiscal policy in the last 70 years, India's fiscal policy has always been pro-cyclical, meaning that whenever the country is doing well, we have an expansionary fiscal policy. When the country is doing badly, we have a contractionary fiscal policy. But the problem in the Indian context is that, as happened in 2008, that we are unable to exit from an expansionary fiscal policy. That created problems in terms of the inflation. So that also we have to take into account. But the important point is that our deficit is sustainable because the difference between nominal GDP growth rate and interest rate has been higher. Even in the recent times, it has declined, but 2019-20 has been a year which has been exceptional. But another important thing is that if you look into interest payment as a percent of GDP, that has coming down steadily over the years. And this is because, again, as I have to say, again, because of an adroit liquidity management on the part of the RBI and also on the part of the government to ensure that the rates are actually aligned with sometimes with the market expectations. And that is one of the reasons why India's debt is sustainable, because we are continuously on a declining path of interest rate payments as a percentage of GDP. Now, let me talk a little bit about the budget suggestion. The budget actually talks a lot of things about the infrastructure. The capital expenditure of the total budget is around 3.4%, which is 5.5 lakh crores. And if we assume the incremental capital output ratio of 4.5, this could add at least 1% to India's GDP. The major thrust for infrastructure is in 3 sectors: roads, railways, transport. You can see the roads, the sectors, total borrowing, total estimated infrastructure spend is 68 billion in FY22, which is basically close to 5 lakh crores. And DFI is expected to create a book of 68 billion over equity base of 2.7 billion, implying leverage of 25 or 5 times per year. Health, actually, we have done a lot, 137% increase in health expenditure, health and well-being budget. Our health expenditure percentage of is now 1.8%, which is very close to South Asian countries like Malaysia and much higher than some countries like Indonesia. So we are actually going there in terms of increasing our health expenditure. And this is some of our health infrastructure: 529 medical colleges, 300 colleges from BDS. And there are states which spends a lot of money on health expenditure. Delhi is one of them, Puducherry and Goa are one of them. Meghalaya, northeastern states also have a high health expenditure. In fact, certain states like Jharkhand, Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, Haryana, Uttarakhand have all increased their expenditure on health in FY21 when compared to FY20. So this means that we are actually creating more infrastructure in human capital, which will pay you dividends in the future. Now, what are the other proposals in the budget? There is to facilitate credit flow under the scheme of Stand Up for India, ST India. There has been some schemes. 2.5 billion has been provided to MSME. The eligibility period to claim tax holiday for startups has been extended by 1 more year to 31st March 2022. Then also the agricultural sector, if you look into the agricultural credit target has been increased to 230 billion. The government is giving a lot of focus on the Rural Infrastructure Development Fund, which basically means that you need to create an agricultural infrastructure so that we are able to develop a price discovery, increase in irrigation fund. 1,000 more mandis will be linked with ENAM. Top 5 states of India now currently account for 60% of the total mandis, and the government is actually diversifying it. I will show you in the next slide. APMC will get Agricultural Infrastructure Fund. Major fishing harbors will be developed as hubs of economic activity, and seaweed park will be also established in Tamil Nadu. The other important tax proposal is that senior citizens will not have to file returns right now if they're having pension and interest income. But this will, and their compliance burden will now be taken over by the banks, public sector banks in this case. The EPFO interest income about 2.5 lakh will be taxable, but that is only for the creamy layer of employees. The government has also given an fillip to affordable houses. So basically the taking loans to buy such houses has now been extended by 1 more year. So basically people can get additional tax benefits under the Income Tax Act if they're buying houses of affordable assets first time. So this is another development which will give a fillip to the affordable housing segment. Interestingly, the affordable housing segment has been doing very well, and there's a lot of interest which has been shown by the NRIs in this segment. The most important point is that the creation of the asset reconstruction company in the Indian context, this is could be a game changer in the Indian context. And I can give you some figures if I have time in terms of how it can change the banking sector. But the important point is that Indian banks today have provision coverage ratio of 90%. So even if we assuming, say, I mean, if you look at the total amount of stressed assets, and if the amount of and if the amount of fund which could actually go into the asset reconstruction company and this AMC, and if we apply that 90% provision coverage ratio on this, our estimates show that the total provisions which the banks have to provide could be not more than rupees 5,000 crores, and this could be the equivalent equity capital which could be put in this ARC or the AMC company, to which whoever puts it up. But the important point is that this 5,000 crore amount of equity capital, our estimates show that if we go by a recovery rate of 43% as has been given in the insolvency and bankruptcy code, it can flow back up to rupees 1 lakh crore into the bank profitability. I repeat, 5,000 crore of equity can plow back 20 times more amount in the bank profitability if we are able to recover the assets under this company. So this is going to be a game changer. The government has also proposed to capital into these public sector banks. There has been a development financial institution which has been already been set up. Insurance companies also the government is going to set up to 74%. The government has liberalized in 2014, but the guidelines took place 1 year to come. But when it was done, FDI and insurance intermediaries, it was done very quickly. So I think this is this is a very good step. India has an insurance penetration of 3.8%. It could go up to 7.2% because of that. But we need to, and this is going to bring capital inflows into the country, develop deeper product expertise and better underwriting skills. The important point is that this is the results of the banking sector. You can see the provision coverage ratio 90%. You can see the NPA ratio. Our bank is at 1.2%. Almost every bank now has a net provision coverage ratio of around 80 to 90%. So Indian banks are adequately provisionalized, adequately in fact capitalized. So therefore, all those talks about the banking sector doing badly is unlikely to cut any ice now. And I can tell you that the financial sector will be the fulcrum of recovery of the Indian economy in this year or so, if you purely go by numbers and not get prejudiced by other things. So, and you can look into the CASA numbers, State Bank of India, all other CASA numbers are actually pretty good. Now, this is another thing. The companies have actually thrown up brilliant results, but here there is also a downside because small companies have been more aggressive in cutting costs, and they have cut employee cost more. Sometimes this has happened because of rationalization of the employees. People have also the salaries were reduced. But the good thing is that we are now hearing that the salaries are getting restored, and maybe within the next 1 or 2 months, the salaries could actually get restored. But sectors such as steel, cement, IT, FMCG, pharma, capital goods, electricals are all reported better growth numbers across parameters in the current quarter. For example, in the quarter or which results are actually being declared. I mean the October to December quarter, which is still ongoing in India. The other thing is that we have done an exercise, and our exercise shows that the steps which the government has taken, the RBI has taken, will see and the restructuring request which has come to the banks is significantly minimal. So we can see some amount of accounts slipping from the restructure, but the stress test showing for the entire system is that this number could be significantly lower than what it was earlier anticipated, and that is going to be the most positive surprise of the banking system in FY21 and possibly in the next 1-2 years. This is another important thing you can see in the rating upgrades and downgrades. Look at the upgrades which has happened so quickly. Metals, steel, cement, gems and jewelry, financials, all sectors have actually done very well in terms of basically all sectors have done very well in terms of getting a better recovery. Now, this is the important thing. India's markets are booming, stock markets. India's total market capitalization, which we have added till 2nd February, which is I think 2 days back, and this number was 756 US billion of market capitalization has been invested in the market. So we invite all companies to come and invest in the market to get the benefits. Financial services, IT, oil and gas, consumer goods, everything you show, everyone has market capitalization has been added. The other thing of the NRIs, I wanted to show something. What are the benefits of the NRIs? I think NRIs will now can incorporate 1% companies in India. There has been tax rebates also to the NRIs. The government proposes to eliminate double taxation for them. The affordable housing schemes also bodes well for the NRIs, and there has been a lot of demand by the NRIs in the affordable housing segment, and which is of the highest interest to the NRI investors currently, this affordable housing. And way forward, I'll just give you a small example before I talk a little bit of the Canadian relationship. This is basically the way forward of the economy could be the game of chickens. Basically, this is an example which is my favorite example. For example, suppose 2 cars are moving on the highway. If both the cars drivers are very egoistic, they decide that they will collide head on. So in this case, both of them may die. So in this case, the P of U I am saying is showing -10, -10. But if suppose one of the drivers has less ego and he decides that he will swerve to avoid the crash, and so then basically he swerves but the other goes head on. In this case, in this case also the total the benefits will be much higher. It could be +1, -1 or vice versa. But in the case where both the drivers have no ego and both of them decide to swerve, the economy, both the drivers will be saved and everyone will be happy with the final outcome, which could be 0-0, or it could be even higher from the -10, -10. So the point which I am trying to mention over here is that it is called the game of chicken, because if you are seeing a car and if you are swerving, people may say that, oh, this guy chickened out, so therefore therefore this guy isn't so this guy is actually chickened out just to avoid the collision. But no, that's why it is called the game of chicken. But because what the RBI has been doing, the RBI has been constantly working with the government, and the government has been working with the RBI, and it has been ensured that the government's fiscal policy, which is for the better good of more capital expenditure, is taken care of an active debt management. So both the government and the RBI are swerving to ensure that the economy gets the best deal at one point of time. This is a classic example of India's game of chicken. So anybody asking me a question today of why, I know people will have questioned that whether the fiscal deficit will have inflation, but this is the example which I like to give to them. As long as you work with a coordinated equilibrium, things will always work up well for you. This is basically something I want to talk about the farmers bill. These are the 3 farmers bill which has happened, and these are actually empowered the farmers. I think there is a lot of politics which is happening in the farmers bill. Mainly the primary farmers are from Punjab or Haryana. There could be some political motivation. I'll give you some numbers and the food for thought is for you. For example, in wheat, you can see that the rank of production and the rank of procurement. For example, a state like Uttar Pradesh, where the rank of production of wheat is fast, but procurement Uttar Pradesh only comes fourth. But for example, a state like Punjab, which is rank in production is 2, but its procurement rank is 1. Look into the example of rice. The production of rice, West Bengal is fast, but its rank in procurement is actually 8th. So then again, if I take the examples of Punjab here, rank in production 3rd, but his rank in procurement is 1st. So basically we follow an asymmetric procurement system. It's time now that the farmers get the benefit of price discovery of the small and marginal farmers. And the important point is that if you look into the number of ENAMs in the country, you will see that the ENAMs are very less in states like Punjab and Haryana because they always have an assured market of procurement. For example, in ENAM is only Punjab in 37. And in states like Gujarat, Maharashtra, Rajasthan, Uttar Pradesh, that are actually grown in leaps and bounds. So we need to correct this anomaly and get every farmer in the country benefit from the reforms which the government is doing. And this is exactly the reason why I'm saying the average annual income of agricultural households of the Punjab, if you look into India, of Punjab is the highest. And look into the states like, say, West Bengal, on Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, other states, they are actually on the lower side. So we need to redistribute the agricultural households' average annual income so that everybody benefits in the quest for an India which is Atmanirbhar and self-dependent. And this is exactly what the Farm Bill wants to do. Unfortunately, I mean, it's not happening. I don't want to get into the politics of that, but this is the data which actually shows over here. And food grain, see, why do we need to diversify? Fruits and vegetables value of output per hectare is 7572 and cereals and pulses are 633. But we still follow a system of supporting the cereals and pulses, which is significantly lower than the fruits and vegetables. So this is one of the reasons why I think we need to correct. Hopefully we'll get it over there some point of time. But as of today, I think the most important thing is discovery of the price in the agricultural sector. Unfortunately, that has happened to some extent, but that needs to happen more in the coming days. Instead of we being dictated by lazy farming and parochial thinking, which we used to have for a lot of these years. This I'll not get into this. I mean, there has been already the banking system, but they are always talked about risk averse, but that is not the case. Banking sector credit has actually grown up significantly in the last couple of years, and that is one of the things. I just want to talk about these production linked incentive schemes. This is basically the 5-year horizon total scheme is actually around 20 US billion. The sectors are 10 sectors: electronics, automobiles, pharmaceutical, telecom, textiles. And this is basically financial outlay of 20 billion, which is 1.5 lakh crores over a period of 5 years. So this is actually one of the very good developments which the government of India has done. What is the opportunities of India and Canada trade relations? If you look into the India-Canada trade relations over the last 5 years, I think India has exported, India has a total trade deficit of around 1 billion. So there is a lot of opportunity for India and Canada both to grow in terms of the trade, their imports and exports. If you look into top 10 imports from Canada, they are basically minerals, edible vegetables, pearls, fertilizers. India exports iron and steel, pharmaceutical products, organic chemicals, like that. But the important point is that the following sectors could offer the greatest opportunity for Canadian companies. There are, for example, aerospace is one of them, automotive, clean tech, defense, pension fund, as all of you know, life sciences, mining, oil and gas, agricultural, food and beverages. And this is basically the FDI flows. That's why what I said, we can improve a lot of from Canada between April 2020 and September 2020. For a period of 20 years, FDI equity inflows from Canada were 2 billion, which is only 0.54% of the total FDI equity inflows into India. So basically, there's a huge lot of opportunity for these Canadian companies to come and invest in India. India has an open policy and we will be all served well if Canada and India develops a relationship which goes back for several years. The Canadian pension funds manages about 434 Canadian dollars. And this is basically one thing which the Canadian pension fund has also agreed to invest around 600 billion in the NIF, National Infrastructure Investment Fund. Hopefully, if more of this comes and given the significant opportunity of India's infrastructure, we will be able to do much well. I will now end very quickly. So there are some areas which needs, I think this could be always discussed separately. India faces certain issues in the areas of trade with Canada. There are agricultural products of India's, including fruits and vegetables. IT sector, there are restrictions on short-term workers. India has asked Canada to remove issue restrictions. So, and the two countries should progress on the SEPA to reach an agreement. This will stimulate bilateral trade significantly and provide long-term benefits for the countries. So I'd like to end here to just say that this budget, if you ask me, is an CSR budget. CSR, as you know, is a term which is used for corporate social responsibility. But I am using the term today for this budget to describe that this is a CSR budget. CSR, C means consolidation, S means spend, and T means the consolidate, and R means the rejuvenate or recover. So it's a CSR budget for India. I would like to end here, and I will take some few questions as you say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Soumyakanti Ghosh. That was, 35 minutes of very riveting analysis. I saw some questions come in from the audience. People said, asked for agriculture, you had a slide on it. People talked about, infrastructure, you had a slide on it. You covered all aspects of the budget, as well as most of the aspects that people thought you might shy away from, for political reasons, but you went straight into it. So thank you very much, Dr. Soumyakanti Ghosh. We looked at the farm perspective. We also got to know what's in it for Canada. What is the opportunity? I think that is fantastic. So really, appreciate that. And I think that's great. So that allows us to move to the next part of our, and also you also got in a chicken game in there as well. So, it almost seemed like I was back into business school, and that was fantastic too. You putting all of it together. So really appreciate it. We'll now move to our next segment, which is the Q&A with our expert. Chetan Sehgal needs no introduction. If you're a member of the Indo-Canada Chamber of Commerce, he's a regular at all of our events. He is the Partner Advisory Services Country Coordinating Partner for India at BDO Canada LLP. So Chetan will be asking some expert questions to Dr. Soumyakanti Ghosh, after which I will take some of your questions from the audience and ask that to Dr. Ghosh as well. So over to you, Chetan.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Vijay. And thank you to the SBI team and Madam Srivastava. It's great to be on the panel with you here. And Dr. Ghosh, we will just jump right into it. As Vijay said, there's a lot that was there that we can unpack, and this could easily be a day-long session. From my perspective, it was very interesting, very riveting. I've reviewed a lot of this material already and still learned more from you today. So that's great. Some of the questions I had, they were answered. I think we just want to maybe slow down on a couple of the points that would be really important to the Canadians and other foreign investors, whether it be businesses or individuals across the world. And we'll focus obviously on the Canadian side. You did touch upon that as well. One of the things, the expenditures of the magnitude that have been announced under the budget, they're certainly welcomed from the corporate sort of responsibility perspective that you provided, and from an economic recovery perspective as well. The markets are giving giving the thumbs up and all that. The announced expenditures combined with the weakening public finances, I guess that's where some of the negative attention might be coming from, the credit rating for the Indian credit that's being afforded to India. From a foreign investor's perspective, what will you say to the businesses and individuals looking to continue to invest in India? While there are measures that are being announced to boost investor confidence in the Indian markets, what advice would you give to make them feel better than some of the credit rating agencies might be doing at this time?
No, I think as I have said in the budget is that just look for 2-3 months and then you have a fiscal deficit number. I think for this year's 9.5%, I already said this number is 8.7% if we take out the off-balance sheet activities. And I think the rating agencies should appreciate that this is the extent of India's this is basically this is the extent of true fiscal indebtedness. There's nothing to hide. Everything is on the table. We have a fiscal deficit of 8%. We're going to get it down to 6.8%, and we have a central bank who is following who is actually following the Ben Bernanke constant discretionary policy making. Some of the things which the central bank has done, actually, why there is always an opening. If the central bank and in any country, fiscal dominance is always the rule, monetary dominance is always an exception. And the Indian context, it is true that there has been fiscal dominance, monetary dominance has played a part. But the important point we have neglected is that if fiscal dominance is adequately and adroitly supported by monetary policies, which are actually well crafted, well intentioned, I think that gives you an optimal result. And this actually has been not brought out to the fore. And if the fact is, and given the fact is that the liquidity which the central bank has been doing, a lot of this liquidity, the central bank actually, there are two types of liquidity in the system. One is the liquidity which is basically driven by deposits, other is the liquidity which is given by policy. The RBI has been so intelligently doing this liquidity, that is, been switching from one liquidity to another, so as the total liquidity pie remains same. So from this point of view, I am sure that this budget is going to be in a new direction. And even if I go able to implement 70 to 80% of what we have done, said in the budget, I think this is actually could be one of the 1991 moments of the Indian economy. And that is also, and of course, there is always a discussion that there is a discussion could be between market disconnect and how the economy is they're working. But at the end of the day, you need to understand that a market cannot lie for 10 continuous months. So, and the market is ultimately a future discounted earning of cash flow. So if you don't see the results, the market is going to punish you someday. So from that point of view, and I am very happy with and I'm very happy that the Indian banks have been able to prove everybody well. And that is exactly also the reason of the global economy. If you look into the global economy banking system, all the banks have gone into the crisis well capitalized. And that is the reason that you will hear about banks not failing or not doing badly in this crisis, which was the everyday we used to hear that banks failing in the 2008 crisis. So we learn by experience, we have learned from experience, and Indian banks have also done the same thing over the 5 to 6 years. They have brought out a credit discipline in the system. And if you allow, and the most important thing is that if you allow the public sector banks and also to relish value in the market, that could create a lot of goodwill in the market. That is exactly what is happening right now, because people can see that, and we have clearly said in our guidance in terms of the NPA. So that is being clearly said. So I can assure you that the financial sector will be the linchpin of development, economic development in the coming future.
Great, thank you, Mr. Ghosh. And I guess maybe we can speak a little bit to the relativity in terms of how globally other countries have fared in terms of the attention they've received from the credit agencies. Is it similar to what's happened to India, India's economy versus other countries? Again,
rating. If you ask me about the rating, I think I'm not. That's a decision which the rating agencies will take at this point of time. But the way the growth has recovered, and if growth recovers, and I think today also there's been a statement of everybody has been talking about, and fiscal policy should play the baton right now. And we are actually not, and look into the fiscal policy, it has been done without raising any taxes on anyone. So my sense is that I think at least trying, and if you get the growth back into the system, which I'm sure will, in the coming days, if the numbers show, I think the rating agencies will not mind that, because at the end of the day, it's only a deficit. The GDP is only a factor between numerator and denominator. If the denominator grows, then obviously the numerator will shrink. And if you have more focus on the infrastructure-led growth, there is no harm, because it creates more employment and output, which is actually the need of the hour.
Okay, great. One of the, I have many questions. I'll probably have to skip a few because I see really good questions coming from the audience as well. One of the things Canada is strong is in manufacturing, and the budget aims to strengthen the notion to make India the manufacturing hub of the world. They announced 7 mega investment textile parks that they'll be established over the 3 years, coming 3 years. The budget introduced certain increases in import taxes on finished goods, while reducing import taxes on parts and supplies required to manufacture in India. Now, we have a lot of clients at BDO and generally speaking in Canada, a lot of manufacturers who are looking to India to either move their manufacturing or actually export to India to take advantage of the growing economy there and sell to the Indian market. What advice would you have to our clients and you know, manufacturing businesses in Ontario and in Canada in general from some of the protectionism type talks that have happened and specifically the changes in the import taxes? Any specific advice you may provide as to how they should react to this?
No, I think we have also codified the labor codes into 4 simple ones. You know, we had a very complicated labor code. So that is one of the reasons, and that is that could be one of the driving forces between the textile companies doing well. And in terms of the manufacturing companies shifting base, we have already seen the PLI scheme has actually significantly attracted attention into India. And if you can actually see in the Indian data, which I showed, that the electronic imports from China is actually declining. And we are also making a conscious policy of, if you look into, for interestingly, our exchange rate has appreciated against the US dollar in the last several months, but it has depreciated in the Chinese dollar. So we are actually making conscious decision to discourage imports from countries, for example, like China and other things, and to develop our own manufacturing base. To that end, I think I can reassure, and we have I think the Canadian Pension Fund is also an example, which is a separate example, of course, but given the amount of opportunities which you have, if you have added around 780 US billion to your market capitalization over the last, say, 11 months, I think that talks a lot about the confidence of the markets in the Indian financial system. And this will only go up as we progress, because we are now creating institutions like DFI and also like AMC AFI, which will take care of some of the nagging issues which are impacting the financial India, which was impacting the Indian financial sector. So from that point of view, I can assure that it is, India is a very good destination as an extremely at a domestic market, which is a significant domestic market. Our consumption is 70% of India's 70%. So I don't see any reason why India cannot offer a great one to this company. And most of the states are also competing with each other, like Uttar Pradesh, in developing a better investment climate, because at the end of the day, they are also ranked on their part by the NITI Aayog. So I think all these augurs well for the India's investment climate, and we should look into from a proper perspective. You should look into India as an conglomeration of several countries. For example, if you look into India, for example, Uttar Pradesh is the size of Brazil. I think one of the states is the size of Japan. So India is actually a conglomeration of several countries, and which all of the countries compete with each other to give you a better investment deal. And we have always the SBI and the chambers of commerce are there. The State Bank offices are also over there. State Bank have actually offices at investment desk, which guide the investors. So I think they can always guide for any specific queries if the companies have any while investing in India.
Perfect.
Chetan, if we could, just wondering if we can take a couple of audience questions, and then if we have time, we'll take some more questions from you. We will just go over a couple of audience questions. Okay, yeah, so that we'll get some of the audience in here as well. So I think one of the questions, I think, Dr. Ghosh, is, with China, losing some of its sheen in becoming the manufacturing, the base of the world, and some of that is, the hypothesis was that could move to India, but there's also competition there. Like, there is the Southeast Asian countries, Vietnam, even Bangladesh, they're also competing for that space, and they've actually done quite well to take on some of that movement away from China. So in the overall figure, how does this budget help India not just expand manufacturing for internal, but also compete with Vietnam and Bangladesh and some of the other countries that are also competing with us?
No, that's true. Basically, what he was saying, yes, there are, some of the countries like Bangladesh has done quite well. Vietnam has done quite well in the last 1-2 years. And I think that there is an element of truth into it. but if I look into the latest figures or something like that with the US Office of Tax, I think India has started to gain back a part of its share. Of course, we need to travel a distance on these sectors of textile, and my sense is that, I mean, the budget has given a significant intent of what it's going to do. It will also depend on how we execute it. But at the end of the day, I mean, yes, it's true that there is competition from several countries to take away, but India has actually seen some success in getting some countries into India, at least at the PLI scheme is concerned. Because the point is that we are moving away from a system of subsidy, subsidy to a production-linked subsidy so that actually is more important than what we have been doing till date. So, and this, I think, this scheme has attracted significant attention. So hopefully, I think, things will turn out better than what it was in the past.
Yeah, Dr. Ghosh, one more. There's a lot of questions that seem to, you've answered some of them, so I will not get into them. There's one question, however, that seems to catch my attention, which is, climate change and carbon emissions, right? I see on the PLI, there is PLI for, battery manufacturing, but overall, from a climate change, bringing down carbon emissions, is there an overall, focus? Do you see anything anywhere else in the budget? I mean, I did find the PLI on the new batteries, but other than that, I think we have a question which says, what are we doing for the climate change and carbon emissions?
No, I think India has said it several times in terms of the climate change. I'll answer this. Before that answer, I'll give you some numbers which is in front of me. China has a share of 13.7% of our imports. So the exact idea of PLI is to reduce. And the projections which the government of India is giving is that the schemes are expected to generate 150 billion new sales, 70 billion in domestic value add, and substantial 0.3% to India's annual GDP growth between FY23 and FY27. Now, having said this, if you ask me about these carbon footprints, I think India is actually doing quite a lot in its in terms of, because the Prime Minister has repeatedly emphasized that we need to reduce our import dependence. We need to generate into a system of, say, basically to the renewable energy. And there is some ambitious targets which has been set forward for this generation of renewable energy in India. But I think this is an effort which the India is doing also on its own. So, I mean, it may not be specifically said that this part of the budget says this, but my point is that there are several now, even the Supreme Court of India is now engaged in ensuring that the people gets a better climate. For example, we have our festival, the lighting festival of Diwali. I'm just giving an example, Diwali. Even today, I mean, there are restrictions of bursting of firecrackers by some of the states and complete restrictions. So I think it's an endeavor which the Indian states are doing on its own, aided by judicial intervention. So, and our objective is to get towards a cleaner energy. So it may not be reflected in the sense that in a budget we have to do this much or this much, but we are doing it in bits and pieces to have a clean and better energy for the humankind and for our children of next generation.
Thank you, Dr. Ghosh. I have one more question, then we'll go back to Chetan. There's been there's numbers going out there that 20,000 Indian millionaires sought, new citizenship, acquiring second citizenship in non-tax jurisdictions. So, is there anything, is there an effort to stem this? Is there an effort to prevent people from doing that for tax purposes, going to other jurisdictions? I mean, simplifying the tax code. I did see something there, but do you want to address that? Is that even on the radar screen of the government, do you think?
No, I think simplifying the taxation, I think direct tax code is one of the codes which the government of India is slowly moving towards. I think last year what it did is the direct tax code, it introduced 2 tax codes, whereby it said that without exemption you will have a lower amount of tax. But I think we have not made much transition in that because the last year was a pandemic one. But I think the idea of India is moving towards a more simplification of a direct tax code in the near future, and I will not be surprised If in the, I think India is perhaps, let's face it, India is perhaps one of the few countries where the personal income tax are a little bit higher than the corporate income tax. And we have reduced the corporate income tax. It's a fact. But I think the problem, as we said in some of the slides, is that broadening of the taxation base is a significantly political issue in India. You can't tax some of the sections which you want to tax, because that's actually is a very hot, politically sensitive issue. So if I take that factors into consideration, that is one constant which in any Indian government has faced in the effects, and it will continue to face. So my sense is that once the economy starts doing, and if I give you an example over here, why we face this issue of taxation, this question comes right now like that. My research shows that over a period of the last 50 years, if you take from the example, say 1970 to 80, 80 to 90, 2000, 90 to 2000, 2000, 2010, and 2010 to 2020. So if I tell this 5 decades, our research shows that every decade, the corporation tax was far higher than personal income tax. But unfortunately, from 2011 to 20, because of those asset quality issues, the corporate sector taxation completely collapsed. So the entire banter had to pass to the personal income tax payers. So this year, I think the government has tried to make an attempt. I think both the corporate tax is possibly going to surpass the personal income tax. And once that starts happening, I think this problem of higher personal income taxes, that could actually we can actually reverse in that direction. But as long as the corporate sector, private investment doesn't keep coming, hopefully this budget will usher in a significant growth in private investment. We'll always have questions raised on this personal income tax, because in Indian context, you can't personal income tax, you can't tax all the people, you can tax only a portion of the salaried class, and there also the government is handpicked. So basically it tries to see from where it can mobilize revenues. But if the corporate tax, the GST actually has now mobilized significantly, we're having a consistently run rate of 1 lakh crore in the last 4 months. So if that stabilizes, and if the corporate tax stabilizes, you will find possibly good news on the personal income fronts in the next 1 or 2 years. Because I also am a tax-paying citizen, I would also like to see my taxes going down at some point of time.
Thank you, Dr. Ghosh. Chetan, if you want to have 1 or 2 questions, we've got maybe another 3 or 4 minutes.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Vijay. Dr. Ghosh, one of the biggest things that came out of this is obviously the privatization and moving the FDI limit in insurance companies to 74% from the present 49% with the Indian management control. This is a major change, as you mentioned, to open up the Indian financial sector, and then along with privatization of banks and potentially the some of the airlines, to boost investor confidence. Can you speak a little bit about the timing of this right now and the impact of these moves, and what are some of the challenges you may see in these fruitioning?
Which one you were talking about?
In generally speaking, in terms of the overall privatization that's been mentioned of the banks and the insurance and the airlines.
I think, see, this is a very good idea. See, again, we are touching another topic of this public and public sector banks. That is again a very politically sensitive issue. So the only thing is that tomorrow, if you start doing that, the people may not be able to sit on the roads for 60-70 days as for example, some of the farmers have been doing for the last 2 months. But that's a separate thing. But my point over here is that I think that's an honest attempt the government is trying to do. It has laid on its table the public sector and policy in the last, I think it has been passed in the cabinet, and it is very clear it wants to get out of the businesses where it has no competence. And my sense is that we are moving in that direction, and this test case of privatization of these 2 public sector banks and 1 general insurance company, if it comes through, that actually could set the ball rolling for a better, privatization. But at the same point of time, you need to remember that public sector banks also has to undergo the social responsibility. For this is Jan Dhan accounts. For example, we had this 400 million Jan Dhan accounts open. State Bank of India, I think, has opened around close to 20% of those accounts, if not more, if I remember it correctly. So if that is the case, and these accounts are a vehicle of financial intermediation for the poorest of the poor people. So at the end of the day, you have to do service also to those people, and that's exactly the jam trinity which we have been talking about, spoke in the beginning. So we also, so my sense is that I think this is also another one of my ideas, that we always do balance sheet activities in terms of profit and loss numbers. So why not do a balance sheet activity in terms of the social activities which the public sector banks or other banks are doing? Then actually you could get a completely different picture, because that is not measured, but what that is not quantified. That's a qualitative part which the banks do. So yes, it's a good idea, privatization, but at the end of the day, we also have to remember that you cannot forego the social work which you are doing in this country of 1.3 population. And that is, at the end of the day, that is also one of the reasons of empowerment of women, financial empowerment of people, which is very important for a society to make progress from a lower strata to the upper strata.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ghosh. Thank you very much, Mr. Venkat Nageshwar. Thank you very much, Chetan, and Apurva Srivastava had to leave, but we've got Ratna from the commerce section here. So I think before we go, I just wanted to one more, Dr. Soumyakanti, your last question, to just end this. You said the proof of the pudding is in the execution, right? This is a plan. This is all of it. So what can hold us back? What could be a roadblock for us to not achieve this, in the short, medium term? For execution, what could be a roadblock, and how do you think we can go around it?
No, I think the rollback, I think nothing holds us back. When the pandemic started, we all thought, I think there was a very good article which came out in Wall Street Journal. This article is just which said that the pandemic is actually, I don't remember the word, swamped everybody, including economists. So when this started, I'll give you an example that there cannot be any holding back. When this pandemic started, we all thought we were going down the drain, but when the economy was opened up, I think we saw one recovery which was significantly larger than anticipated. And today I am talking to you saying that India has perhaps attained a herd immunity, which is basically something which, for example, a state like Maharashtra, which is the maximum number of cases, I never thought of. So nothing holds us back. We can, if we have the belief and the resilience, we can do it. The only thing is that there could be some, ifs and buts in this journey. But I am very confident that we have been able to do some of the most difficult reforms also in the last couple of years, or maybe even before that. And I think we'll continue to do that. For example, currently we are trying to do some reforms in the agriculture sector in terms of the price discovery, but it's a very politically sensitive issue. Maybe someday we'll be able to do something on that one. And my sense is that, let's stay positive and move in that direction.
Thank you very much.
There is
Dr.
a high,
yeah, go ahead.
There is a high level of commitment by the government, and I'm sure nothing would stop this and nothing will hold us from moving forward.
Thank you, Mr. Nageshwar. And I think let's look at a V-shaped recovery where the outward V is going to be higher than the inward going V. So I think we're already seeing that there. On that note, we'll just move to, thank you very much, everybody. We've got to just thank a few sponsors and partners. We're going to thank our technology partner, Tangentia. We also would like to thank our sponsors, Turkish Airlines, SBI, Canada Bank, specifically I'd like to thank Joseph Xavier, the CEO, Ritu Kumar, retail banking, and Mr. Vashist, Anand Vashist, ICICI Bank Canada, Vijay Raymond Jain, Seneca, GT20, TELUS Business, and our media partners, Weekly Voice and PTC Punjabi. And we'd like to thank everybody for attending this session. We have many of these planned for the rest of the year. Please follow us on social media. And if you want to become a member of the ICCC, please go online or send us an email to iccc@iccconline.org. Again, a big thank you to everybody. Those of you in India, have a good evening. Those in Canada, have a fantastic day ahead. And I think it's good news all around. We are very excited. And I think as the Indo-Canada Chamber of Commerce, I think we will be looking at India we're already looking India in a very positive way. We will be looking at it in a more positive way now. And it's very reassuring to hear all of what Dr. Soumyakanti Ghosh said. So thank you very much, everybody. Have a nice one. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you
And
very
nice
much.
weekend. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.